So are you positioning yourself to be a fantasy fiction writer? Are you going to be known as a fantasy fiction writer?
I'm going to be known as a writer.
As a writer.
That's it. I'm going to be known as a writer.
Most great writers all over the world, they have a
defining
genre. Yeah, they are most focused on.
Yeah.
You know, they could write some other stuff, but
Yeah.
the focus. I mean, is that going to be your own story?
My next 2 books are fantasy. That is certain. I have the stories in my. I started working on them. Sequel to this, and another book that is very Nigeria focused but fantasy. A teenage is targeted at young people, secondary school age, but it's fantasy. Something like Percy Jackson, you know, that kind of thing. So yes, there's going to be a lot of fantasy, but I like what J.K. Rowling did. She wrote Harry Potter for such a long time, and after the 7th Harry Potter book, she stopped. She wrote another book that was detective under a different name. Yeah. As a writer, of course there'll be a defining genre, but you always want to make sure that you don't allow the burden of expectation limit or stifle your creativity into one area. C.S. Lewis, one of the great fantasy writers, wrote fantasy, wrote non-fiction. I wrote a lot of Christian books and all of that, you know, so as much as possible, yes, I will do a lot of fantasy, but I will not allow myself to be limited or stifled into one path. For me, I always want to make sure that my creativity has options.
What's the biggest challenge that you and other writers in Nigeria have to face every day as writers?
Let me think about that. I think the biggest challenge right now is structure to amplify. So when you write a brilliant work that everybody says is brilliant, now if you look at structures available to writers outside of the country, if the work is brilliant, there are too many things available to amplify that work so that it sells, and sells a lot of copies. The person can look forward to selling 5 million copies, 3 million copies, 4 million copies, 10 million copies. It's easy because there are structures. The author does not have to practically push over the line every time. Here, it's totally different. So you write a brilliant work, but you have to do so much to achieve, and it's not just writing, even in music. You see our musicians, they've sung for 5, 10 years, they are big stars in Africa, and then some guy that's in America releases one song and becomes a bigger worldwide star than that guy who has been doing music in Africa as a big star for a long time. Why? Because there are structures to amplify that guy's work. For me, it's the biggest challenge. It's the reason why a lot of writers would rather find a way to get a foreign publisher or get published outside. It's the biggest challenge. I believe that we will overcome this. It will take some work, but we can.
Okay. Who is your favorite Nigerian writer?
My favorite Nigerian writer, Elechi Amadi.
Elechi Amadi. Seriously?
Seriously.
Why?
The man he's a beautiful story writer. I read his books recently, and I was just watching. I told someone, I said, even where he uses a cliche, he uses the cliche so beautifully that you are not concerned that this is a cliche. That's how good he is at
storytelling. And the amazing thing about him and those of his generation is, I mean, they had no internet.
They had no internet. They had nothing.
They had no laptops or computers. Just pulled out their pens and just wrote the good old-fashioned way.
That's so beautiful.
That's surprised now. I was expecting you to mention a contemporary writer.
I read contemporary writers, but I think that I was saying that I bought 4 books recently. I went for an event in Grill and Read, and I bought 4 books. 3 contemporary writers, 1 Elechi Amadi book. Now, the contemporary guys were pretty nice. I mean, I read their stories, pretty good books. But that book stood out. That was The Concubine by Elechi Amadi. It stood out. Okay. So that's the thing. That man's writing stands out for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so great job here today.
Thank you very much.
I'm expecting the sequel to this.
Yeah.
Guardians of the Seal. Thank you for joining us on Channels.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me. Well, I hope you have enjoyed today's show. We look forward to having you with us again next week. Before then, please send us your comments through any of our social media platforms displayed on your screen. I am Olakunle Kasumo. Remember, one great book can change your life.